We're good to go, Ms. Rousseau?
Just confirming, your worship.
Thank you. I'm seeing live, that's why I asked.
We're good, your worship.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. I'd like to call this regular council meeting of November 22nd, 2022 to order with a motion to adopt the agenda as presented. Someone make that motion for me, please. Councillor Cherry, seconded by Councillor Stapenhurst. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Adoption of the minutes of the regular council meeting in November 8th, 2022. Someone want to make that motion? Councillor Orlando, seconded by Councillor Lusso. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Any business arising from the minutes of November 8th? And then I've got two motions here. Any other business from councillors on that? Saying none, there is a motion to rescind for Board of Variance. Someone want to put that on the table for me, please? Councillor Stapenhurst.
That the appointment of Mayor Sauls to the Board of Variance be rescinded.
Seconder for that motion, please. Councillor Devlin. All in favor? Motion's carried. I should have told you why. It's the mayor can't sit on the Board of Variance, so that's the reason that we have that. All right, second motion, please. Someone want to do number two? Councillor Devlin.
That the appointments of Mayor Sauls and Chief Administrative Officer Evan Parliament to the MIABC Board be rescinded.
Seconder for that motion.
Do you want to tell us why?
Yep, give it as soon as you give a second, then we'll discuss it. So Councillor Cherry has seconded it. So the mayor and the CAO do not sit on the MIABC board. We are voting members. You just wanted me to say that a couple of times. Is that explanation enough?
No, that's great.
Okay. Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item number 5, Development Variance Permit DVP 2022-008. Mr. Simon, do you want to do a brief presentation, or Ms. Comars, do you want to do a brief presentation before we ask for the motion to be put on the table?
To your worship, I do have a presentation prepared if you would like to have me present it for you. I'm also here to answer any questions should you have.
All right, Council, would you like to see the presentation briefly to kind of get familiar with these things?
Yes.
Yes, if you could, please, Ms. Comars.
I'm going to share my screen in just a moment.
Thank you.
Here's the presentation. It's very similar to the report that was already prepared for council. Presentation is for Development Variance Permit DVP 2022-008. It is to vary the front yard setback to allow for a proposed location of a covered carport at the subject property of 810 8th Street. Presentation overview, there's going to be a background with property details, a background with public notification, proposed details, staff evaluation, and staff recommendation. The background, property details, that's located at 810 8th Street. The property currently contains a single-family dwelling with an attached garage. The zoning for the subject property is R2A, Special Low Density Residential, and the surrounding lands are all residential properties. This DVP is seeking to vary, the background, the public notification. As a DVP application, DVP 2022-008 seeks to vary the requirements set forth in the zoning bylaw. Landowners within 100 meters of the subject lands have been provided a notice. 47 properties are captured in the 100-meter notification area. At this time, there's been no submissions received by those 47 people that have received these notifications. There's also been a public binder provided at the front of development services, and no one has come in, to the best of my knowledge, to ask any questions, and I have not received any phone calls. The proposed details of this development variance application is to allow for a covered attached carport. The requested variance is to reduce the front yard setback requirement from 6 meters to 2.7 meters. Staff evaluation. The proposed addition enhances the front entranceway, allowing for minimal maintenance for the primary access, as it will be more sheltered from inclement weather. The reduction allows for the family to be able to age in place, as the addition negates the need for shoveling, clearing of a vehicle. The proposed carport has a flat roof that contains snow and restricts it from shedding on adjacent properties or into the city right-of-way. The proposed location of the carport allows for maximum utilization of the lot, with a larger rear yard for residents with minimal impact on the neighbors. Staff recommendation that DVP 2022-008 be issued to allow the front yard setback to be reduced from 6 meters to 2.7 meters. And I'm here if council or your worship have any questions.
Great, thank you, Ms. Gomez. I appreciate that explanation. It's fairly simplistic, just front yard setback again from the traditional 6 meters to 2.7 meters. I'm going to ask for council to just put this motion on the table, and then we can discuss further if you have any questions. Someone want to make the motion for me, please? Councilor Orlando?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'll make the motion. I move that development variance permit DVP 2022-008 be issued at Lot 1, Section 27, Township 23, Range 2, west of the 6th Meridian, Kootenai District Plan EPP 71684, PID 030258324 for the following variance to zoning bylaw number 2299. Section 6.3.5 minimum yard dimensions, subsection I, to allow the front yard setback to be reduced from 6 meters to 2.7 meters.
Seconder for that motion, please. Councilor Cherry. Any discussion on that motion? I'm familiar with this piece of property. It's just down the street from where I live, and I think it's a great addition to the property. I do not have any issues with that, and it's far enough away that it doesn't impinge on neighbors or on the sidewalk. So I think it's a great addition to the property. Any other comments or questions? Councilor Orlando, then Councilor Lucio.
Yeah, I just have a procedural question and just getting back up to speed here. So this is under public or other hearings. This is a development variance permit. So I'm just a refresher on where this is in the process. I'm assuming we're approving the development variance permit here.
Yeah, there's no public hearing required, but Mr. Simon, do you want to speak to it, or Ms. Comars?
Your worship, I'm able to speak on that.
Okay, go ahead, please.
There's no public hearing required with this. This is because we're varying something in the zoning bylaw. We need council's permission to vary it. At this point, if the DVP were to be approved, the applicant is also required to submit a building permit. The building permit would need to adhere to what the DVP has been approved for by council. And then as staff, we would be able to approve the building permit without council's permission.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Any other questions, Councilor Lucy?
I was just wondering if this development will have any effect on snow removal when it comes to the sidewalk or onto roadways.
No, because it's far enough away back from the sidewalk. So the sidewalk machine that goes down, we're still 3 meters away. So
Okay.
in Mr. Black's measurements, it's 6 feet, correct?
Yeah, and typically the sidewalk is well inside the property boundary. And so this is further behind that by 2.8 meters. So staff does not anticipate any additional effort required by city staff in order to maintain the sidewalk or snowplow.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much.
All right. Any other questions or concerns? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you, Ms. Comars.
Thank you.
All right, I just want to go on to announcements from the mayor. So this past week, we had a discussion with the Communications Task Force, and we had an initial meeting to work on scope, terms of reference. And during that meeting, the discussion led to the recommendation to resurrect an e-newsletter to enable easy public access to city communications. So Councillor Orlando, this is your kind of your task force. Do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Your worship, not really. I think the city had a email newsletter that it was doing previously. It was discontinued a while back. I think improving the city's reach and also having a reliable format where people know that we are consistently going to communicate with them and provide updates will be a good one. And yeah, we're just getting the task force going. So we're scheduled to meet again on December 7th to formalize it. But in the interim, I think it's just a good tool. And it'll be great to see a sustained effort to get a lot of people, especially people who are engaged in the community, just signing up and opening up when they receive it, so they can have sort of that assured format of reaching them in communications. So.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for your input. Just want to mention, I received an email today from CSRD. Citizens can start composting food waste at the Revelstoke landfill. So that's up and running now. It's a $10 minimum fee for disposing of compost, while larger loads are going to be charged $120 a ton. And there's a big long list of compostable material. And as we move on, the city's looking at ways to collect compost. Is that correct, Mr. Black? We'll be talking about that sometime in the future.
Yes, Your Worship, a little background there for council. Last year's prepared a report and to implement a bear-proof composting project in the community, in addition to purchasing a couple trucks with automated container handling so that we don't hurt our staff. At the same time, council authorized staff to pursue a grant on the order of, I believe it was $2.1 million to offset these costs, plus a city contribution of $800,000 for this project. And we have not yet heard what the status, there has not been a change in status of the grant at this point in time. So we're in a holding pattern into implementing that project.
Great, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to delegations and presentations. So Columbia Basin Trust organizational update. So we have Mr. David Raven in the room, and online, Mr. Johnny Strelov. So Mr. Raven, do you want to start, or Mr. Strelov? How do you want to move forward?
Mr. Strelov will start off. He has the start of the presentation, but it's a pleasure to be here and present to you today.
Great, thank you. Mr. Strelov.
Thank you, Mayor Sells. Can I just do a first to check to make sure I am seen and heard?
Yes, you are. Thank you.
Okay. And we do have a presentation deck, and I'm not sure if it will be shown within council chambers or if we're relying on a hard copy to circulate to council.
Ms. Rousseau, do you have that slide deck?
I can provide assistance if you require.
Yes, please.
And perhaps while we're waiting for that, I just want to thank council for the opportunity to join you today, if only virtually. I probably would have had to do it anyway, given the amount of snow falling outside of my window. My name is Johnny Strelov, for those that I have not met, and I am president and CEO of Columbia Basin Trust, and of course joined today by Dave Raven, somebody who I imagine does not require introduction in those chambers. Just a little bit of opening context. Each year, we typically reach out to local governments and offer an opportunity to share some reflections on the past year, the work of Columbia Basin Trust and organizations from around the region. This year, we very specifically wanted to chat a little bit less about that and a little bit more about one of our longer standing programs that is of considerable interest around the region. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So as opposed to the past, we really were a bit more proactive in our outreach this year. So there was an opportunity to describe some changes in this program and respond to any questions. So if I could describe what it is we're intending to walk through today, it's a bit of a past, present, and future conversation with probably not much time spent on the past or the future, but more on the present. So if we could move forward one slide. Okay, and I'm not sure how this is presented in council chambers. It may be quite small and difficult to see. As I said, a little bit of a backward look into the past. Columbia Basin Trust, our last fiscal year end, we described 2 basin residents at our AGM in September, and we often do so with the assistance of what we call infographics, and this is just one example of some of the highlights of regional achievements in our last fiscal year. You'll note there was approximately $88 million provided to residents, community organizations, and businesses around the region to advance a broad number of priorities. And I think for many residents, they associate the trust with grants. So financial support for community projects or initiatives. And certainly that's a big part of the work that we do, about $62 million last year. But that's not the only use of funds. So for example, there was almost $12.5 million of what we call capital projects. A significant portion of this was investing in fiber optics to bring connectivity to our more rural communities who are underserved. We also had about $6 million in new lending to basin-based businesses, and another $7 million for direct investment in real estate and other commercial investments. So of that $88 million, it's not all by way of direct grants and supports. There's a number of different ways that Columbia Basin Trust supports basin residents, organizations, and businesses. It was a very busy year last year, as it was for everybody. There were approximately 2,400 projects supported around the region, opportunities for the trust to partner, and there are currently just over 70 active programs and initiatives. So a very quick highlight of last year, and Dave Raven will speak to some of the stories a little bit later in this presentation and where those stories are captured. Could we advance the slide, please? Okay, so that was the past. This is really the meat of the presentation, why we wanted an opportunity to speak direct with council. Of the more than 70 programs and initiatives I mentioned earlier, the longest standing programs for Columbia Basin Trust are what are known as the Community Initiatives and Affected Areas Program. These have been in place since the late 1990s. And there have been some changes to these programs over time, but really at the moment, they don't look a lot different than they did when they were first launched in the late 90s. We have to review our full suite of programs and initiatives over time. We really want to make sure that they're continuing to deliver the benefits that are intended. We want to make sure that they're linked to strategic priorities. So those areas that the basin residents feel are most important in their communities. And we also want to make sure that our programs are efficiently delivered. So we made the decision about 18 months ago to conduct a review of these 2 longstanding programs. And it was a much more robust evaluation than what we typically do for programs because of how large this program is and the number of partners required to make it successful. So we engaged a third-party consultant to help us with this work, who reached out to, former councils around, and when I say former, I mean pre-October election councils from around the region to solicit feedback, as well as from a number of community organizations. So I really want to express appreciation for all the feedback we received, and consolidated that feedback and presented a series of observations and recommendations for the trust board to consider as we look to this program. And at a very high level, I was very pleased to see that clearly these 2 programs continue to deliver significant benefit in our communities. However, there's still some opportunities for some refinements as we move into the future. So maybe first I'll talk about what is staying the same with these 2 programs, if we could advance the slide. So the purpose, the overarching purpose of these programs remains unchanged, and it's really to provide support to typically smaller community-based initiatives from around the region. That purpose is staying unchanged. The manner in which the program is delivered through what I would consider a really incredible partnership between Columbia Basin Trust and local governments and First Nations, where we work collaboratively to make sure that the funding is made available in a very flexible way and in a manner that incorporates feedback from Basin residents. One of the fundamental tenets of this program is the public needs to be given opportunity to provide input into decisions. So that would remain unchanged. And also no change to the funding allocation to the various communities. Again, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities around the region. No change to the funding allocations. So those kind of core tenets, if you will remain the same. But there were areas that were identified as opportunities for refinement. And if we go to the next slide, I'll speak to those. So the community initiatives in affected areas, like I said, originally launched in the late 90s. And the reason for two separate programs, the rationale for their existence, and in many cases, even a lack of awareness that it's two separate programs. With the passage of time, there's been some confusion, and a decision has been made to effectively merge these two into a single program. So we will no longer see CIP, AAP, and instead in our communications and how we relate to residents and organizations, we'll be talking about the READY program. So READY is just a new name standing for Resident Directed. That is a consolidation of those two historic programs. The Trust Board has also notionally supported and approved a 5-year program commitment for the READY program. Now, each year, as local governments have to follow, it's still subject to an annual budget review process, but there is a notional commitment for 5 years to keep the program unchanged in terms of structure and dollars. What also is changing is an increase in administration funding. We absolutely recognize that there are significant demands on local government partners and the administrators to organize, market, evaluate, adjudicate, and ultimately contract and oversee and administer the various project agreements. And so there is an allowance for increased administration funding to local government partners. And then finally, a commitment for the trust to have more presence, staff presence during the public processes in communities. And this is really to provide feedback when asked. That's something that we consistently hear. There's a desire for that. But I think even more important is we often hear in these presentations that a project might come forward that is actually a better fit for another trust program, or there's an idea or a concept or a proposal that might be a really good fit for another trust program. By having a trust employee there during the public process, they could be a resource to answer any of those questions and then provide guidance to those community groups or individuals with those program ideas. So a lot with the programs. The program is staying the same. Why it exists, the nature of the partnership with local governments and First Nations, the funding levels, those are all staying the same. Some refinements is we will have a new program name. There's an increased allowance for administration fees, and we will have greater trust presence at community processes. So very quickly, that's a summative review of what the Columbia Basin Trust Board has approved for the future of the READY program. And maybe with that, I will hand it over to Dave to talk a little bit about the future.
Thank you, Johnny. Actually, look at the trust and its construct in provincial legislation is somewhat unique. In fact, it's a very unique piece of legislation. Part of it that is remarkable is that the priorities of the trust and the strategic planning is generated within the basin itself and by the basin residents. So our strategic plan every year, and it's a 5-year ongoing plan, is very critical to the priorities and operations of the trust. Our current plan process was interrupted with COVID. So we had a large, massive public engagement process planned with open houses and symposiums and such that we had to cancel. So we extended the existing plan with the input we had for that 2-year period. We are going into the phase now, and our current plan expires in December of 23. So through 23, starting in the early months of the winter and through the spring and into midsummer, there will be a series of engagement opportunities, including 3 symposiums and a number of open houses and engagement processes throughout the entire basin, soliciting public input. And it's asking the members and people of the basin for their priorities. With the growth of the trust over the years, you'll notice that it's gone from individual projects, small grants, to programs. And programs have a beginning and an end, so that they are targeting specific needs, specific objectives as they go forward. Having said that, those priorities then are generated through our public engagement processes. And you'll note in the magazine, of course, there's some talk of it. There are 2 overreaching goals that we have, which is climate change and Indigenous community relations, First Nations relations, as well as all of the other goals that we have within the trust at this time. The new strategic plan, which we hope to have completed in draft form by the end of the summer, through review with board and into approval by November of 23. It's quite critical that we do that. We're looking forward to the input and the engagement with the entire basin as we go forward. And there will be 23 communities, I believe it is, that will have some form of engagement process, as well as the 3 symposiums. And there will be invitations and such coming out to everybody. And I really encourage you all to participate and to provide that input, because the feedback is critical for the trust to carry forward with our priorities. Having said that, I'm sure that you all received the magazine in the paper or in your mailbox. And I picked up a dozen of them out of the recycle bin. So somebody hasn't taken the time to read it. But it is, in our mind, it is a very important document to understand not only the magnitude, benefits of the trust, the assets and programs that we're delivering, but to engage in a discussion of some of the programs that we've been delivering along for the last couple of years. And with that, you'll notice agriculture, food production, environmental issues, educational issues, early childhood issues, things that are not typically, or they cannot, by law, supplant obligations of government, either local government or provincial government. So we can't plow roads. But we can do other things on the side. And the trust tends to be, and is often, the funding partner. We do everything in partnerships of some form or another, but we try to achieve our objectives through those partnerships and through the programs that we've established going forward. I look forward to your input. I will be attending as many sessions as I can, but your input and your feedback is critical. And if you have not read it page to page, back and forward, I really encourage you to do so. Particularly the one page that's copied in your handouts with respect to the numbers and the magnitude of those numbers. The trust has grown from its initial allotment of 245 million, which we purchased 1 hydroelectric dam. We now have 4, with an annual rate of return around 12%. It funds our activities in a big way. We're probably at 2.4 billion. I personally think that's very conservative in today's markets. We're able to change the basin. And you can see it as you go around the basin, particularly if you know what you're looking for. But I see those changes in my travels throughout the basin in very significant ways. And in Revelstoke, you're very aware of them. You just don't realize it's basin funding that created it. So with you, thank you very much. I think we had an opportunity for questions.
Yep. Any questions of Mr. Raven or Mr. Council? I think when we talk about CBT, you hear that all the time. They're definitely a great resource as far as funding and different programs in the community. Most of the social programs are tied to the CBT. And if it weren't for that funding, these programs would never even get off the ground. So very appreciative of that. But any questions for Mr. Redmond?
It's got social, environmental, recreational programs, trail programs. It's a whole host of opportunities that we've had over the years. And in Revelstoke, we tend to get focused on the CIP program, this the new DRIP program. That's one small component. We happen to have a very significant piece of that, but it's only a small piece of the total delivery of benefits through the trust itself.
Great. Well, thank you. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Johnny. Appreciate your time. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks again. Johnny, any last words?
Yeah, maybe just a last word if I could, a little bit of a plug. I know that we do have some new members of council who may not have a lot of history with Columbia Basin Trust, and there will be an invitation circulated in the coming weeks to join some virtual sessions scheduled in January to learn a little bit about the creation, the origin of Columbia Basin Trust, what the organization is and what it isn't, and dig a little further into some of our programs, priorities, how they are developed, and some of the impact around the region. So just ask that council stay tuned, and those that are interested in participating, it'd be wonderful to see you.
Great. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Bear in mind, the trust is only 27 years.
Yeah. And so longevity with a lot of the directors on the trust. So David, how many years have you been with the trust? Many years, is that correct?
There's a 6-year minimum.
Okay.
Or maximum, actually. And in my case, I was on in a previous life.
Right.
And then when I was unelected, I lost that seat, and then I was reappointed by the province.
Right.
So I'm in my, I will be finished at the end of December.
Okay. All right. Thank you again. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, council, we're going to move on to item 9A, housing agreement bylaw. And Mr. Simon, do you have a presentation? And then we can move forward.
Through your worship, yes, I do have a very brief presentation. And I mean very, very brief. I've been told that sometimes I like to give very long presentations, so I will keep it very short for council. And as always, if there's any questions, feel free to pass them along. So this is a housing agreement that is required to be entered into via bylaw for an apartment building located at 1219 Victoria Road. So housing agreements are administered under the Local Government Act. They can be used to limit the form of tenure within residential buildings, availability of housing units to certain individuals, administration and management of units, as well as to set rates or of rent or sale. The subject property received approval for a development permit as well as a development variance permit from council on May 24th, 2022 for a 24-unit apartment building. In accordance with the council decision of that day, there was a resolution that required the owner to enter into a housing agreement prior to issuance of a future building permit. So the development permit is just about issued for this property. What we need now is a housing agreement to be complete prior to issuance of any future building permit. So in accordance with the requirements of the zoning bylaw, to allow for development at this density under the C6, the Victoria Road commercial zoning, we would need 15% of the units, which equates 4 units in this circumstance, to be secured through a housing agreement. So getting into a few particulars of the agreement itself. So again, this is a 24-unit apartment building, contains 15 one-bedroom units, 9 two-bedroom units. So you know exactly the type of development that we've been kind of pushing for within the city to get smaller unit sizes and more units within certain areas, especially along Victoria Road. Again, prior to issuance of a building permit, the owner needs to enter into a housing agreement. And the reason why it's prior to issuance of a building permit is because we are making sure that we are reflecting the resolutions recommended to council in accordance with the provincial legislation. When you look at the legislation in the Local Government Act, it speaks towards these requirements before issuing a building permit. So that's why we get these agreements done at building permit stage rather than development permit stage. So it would be for 4 one-bedroom units would be subject to the housing agreement. The term of the agreement that's in the bylaw before council is 8 years with a maximum rent of $1,375 per month. which would be excluding strata and utility fees, as intended to target the low to moderate income category as per the most recent housing needs and demands assessment. So I've pulled it up on the screen here. Our housing needs and demands assessment was completed in 2018 based on mostly census data from 2016. So it is a little bit out of date. When we did the housing action plan, we did provide some updates, but we didn't complete a full housing needs and demands assessment. So one of the things with this agreement too is that rent may be increased annually, but it may only be increased in accordance with the rates set out in the BC Residential Tenancy Act. So staff recommend that the bylaw be read a first, second, and third time. And in the staff report, we have also included an alternative recommendation should council desire that staff go back and have further negotiations with the applicant. Thank you. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. Council, any questions for Mr. Simon before I ask for the motion to be put on the table? Councilor Stapenhurst.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Gary. So the question that I have is, the term is originally set for 8 years. How did they come up with the 8 years for those 4 allocated units to be affordable? How come, like, why not 10 years, why not 12?
Can you speak to that, Mr. Simon?
Through your worship to Councillor Stapenhurst, the terms of these agreements, they can be anywhere from 5 years to 10 years to 12 years. Generally speaking, it is a negotiation that does happen between the city and the owner. We're trying to work with the owners in a way that gets them to a place where these agreements are crafted in a manner that allows the development to be viable. Right now, one of the big challenges that we're having, and I can tell you, is when we're working with developments, our zoning bylaw, the baseline densities are pretty low. So when you do density bonusing and you got to do housing agreements on top of that, it starts to make these projects quite challenging from a financial perspective. So each project will be different. And with this particular project, I can tell you it was several rounds of negotiation with the owner. And, you know, on their side, they're dealing with increased costs, increased labor costs, material costs. So there are challenges. And with respect to this particular development, we landed on 8 years. There was discussions of 10 years at a potentially higher rate, 8 years at a lower rate, or 5 years at an even lower rate. 8 years is kind of where we landed. But that said, there is an alternative recommendation in the report should council wish to see this agreement extended or wish to see rates negotiated further, totally at council's discretion.
Okay, does that answer your question, Councilor?
Yes. One last question is on the strata fees. Do we know what those strata fees would be in addition to the rent?
Any comment, Mr. Simon, regarding what strata fees would be?
Through your worship, so the strata fees won't be finalized until they actually formally establish the strata organization. For a development of this nature, there will be some community, or there will be some local amenities for the residents of the building. A rooftop patio is one of them. So if I had to wager a guess, it would probably be somewhere in the $200 to $250 range for strata fees, which may include some portion of utilities as well. It all depends on how they structure the strata organization.
All right. Follow.
One last question, I swear. The traffic on Victoria Avenue, how is this going to be impacted by this development here? I mean, with 24 units, you would imagine parking for several cars, if not more.
So there's no parking on Victoria Road. It's going to be in behind.
Okay.
So it'll be a parking lot in behind. Mr. Black, you want to speak to parking? Inevitably, there may be some spillover visitors that may be parking along that roadway in behind, but I'll let Mr. Black speak to that as an engineer.
Thank you, Your Worship. You've explained it adequately, in my opinion. Yes, we typically do not encourage, or unless it's a variance by council, allow access on to collectors or arterial roads.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, Councilor Cherry?
I've just got a couple questions. Do we have any idea of the square footage of the units?
Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, if I am remembering correctly, it will be somewhere in the 500 to 650 square foot parameters, if I am remembering correctly off the top of my head.
All right, thank you.
Also, is there a cash in lieu option, or?
So through your worship to Councilor Cherry, and just for the rest of council, one of the tools that we can potentially use as an organization is, instead of having these negotiations for housing agreements when we see density bonusing come to the table, there is a way that we can potentially set the system up that instead of entering into housing agreements, owners would have the option to pay cash in lieu. That money would go into an affordable housing reserve, and then it could be used for different affordable housing projects. We're not quite there yet in terms of establishing the policy framework to enable that type of development. But staff are, as we continue to work forward on implementing the provisions in the housing action plan, we would be looking at options for these housing agreements that have already been issued historically. And if there's an appetite on council to allow them to retroactively potentially pay cash in lieu to negate the housing agreement. But that would be a separate subsequent conversation at the time we bring those policies forward for council consideration.
Thank you. Follow up, Council.
Yeah, the last question is, let's say we approve this today, they start building tomorrow. We're looking at probably a 2-year length of construction. So with the price that we're talking about today, what do we have by means of enforcement towards a developer if he just decides not to go with those numbers in, let's say, 2 years' time when it's finished because they're outdated?
Mr. Simon.
So through your worship to Councillor Cherry, generally speaking, the primary method of enforcement of a housing agreement is suing a developer who is found to be in non-compliance with it. That said, within the development services group, we're working with the applicants quite closely on multiple applications. And it's really important to have a good, positive working relationship with the applicants so that if there is ever an issue of non-compliance that's brought to the table, the first approach from staff is to always directly work with the individuals who are potentially creating the issue of non-compliance to try and avoid getting into situations where there are those legal implications that need to be pursued.
Okay.
Awesome, I appreciate that info. And the last question is, if you agree on this amount today, will the RTA increases be effective immediately from today or from the time of construction is completed?
Through your worship, it would be at the time of construction being completed. They would be limited to that $13.75 per month. So if the building doesn't get constructed for another 3 years, let's say, that's when they get occupancy. That's when the $13.75 starts, and they would be able to increase on an annual basis in accordance with the Residential Tenancy Act from there.
Thanks, Paul.
Councilor Orlando.
Through your worship, yeah, just a follow-up question, sort of similar to the last ones that was being asked, but looking at it from a different perspective. In terms of this agreement or other agreements that the city, similar agreements that the city has, what sort of oversight does the city have on an ongoing basis to monitor these? So if I wanted to check on what rent is being charged or who's in there or how it's being administered, what ongoing sort of paperwork or reporting or understanding does the city have? So if somebody 5 years from now wanted to check in and see everything, check up on all their agreements that they have in place, how does that work?
Mr. Simon, please.
Through your worship to Councillor Orlando, and you're correct, that's kind of a broader conversation, not 100% attributable to the bylaw that's before council today. But generally speaking, and this is getting into the broader overarching framework of how we want to administer housing as an organization and as a municipality. So right now it would be the Planning and Development Services Group that would be responsible for overseeing the implementation and administration of these housing agreements. Now, and again, this is kind of a separate conversation, but long-term for the organization, do we have the capability and capacity to be administering these agreements, to be reporting on the things that Councillor Orlando is referring to there? So that's certainly a conversation and a topic that needs to be explored a little bit further, as we are going to see these types of agreements come to fruition a little bit more readily, I would say, given the fact that we do have some density bonusing provisions in the zoning bylaw. But right now it's an agreement between the city and the owner. And so it would be the Planning and Development Services Group that would be working to ensure the implementation of that agreement in accordance with the terms and conditions contained therein, and doing any reporting for, if council is curious about how these housing agreements have been going.
All, Councilor?
You should know.
All right, thank you. All right, can I have a councillor put this motion on the table? And then if there's any other questions, we can speak to them. So I want to make that motion for me. Councillor Stapenhurst. Want me to for me, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies.
Item 9A.
Yes, sir. So closed.
It's up top here if you want.
It's on the screen if you want to look from there.
It's a vision test.
Yeah, it's very small, but yeah, that right under recommendation.
Thank you, sir. That the housing agreement bylaw number 2347 be read a first, second, and third time.
Thank you. Seconder for that motion, please. Councillor Cherry. Any further discussion on that motion? I'm definitely supportive of this motion as it goes forward. This is a great way to see this apartment building come to fruition. The proponent is in the room and has been working well with our staff to try to get this moving forward. I'd love nothing better than to see another 24-unit apartment building for people in our community, and definitely seeing the lower rate. It's right at the present time less than what's recommended in our new living wage. So I'm appreciative of this, and I think this is a good way to move forward. Any other comments or questions from council? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Note that this motion has been approved unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Simon. Appreciate it. All right, moving on to 11A staff reports. Development services, expression of interest. Someone want to put that motion on the table? Ms. Braun, do you have a presentation before we put the motion on the table?
To your worship, I do not have a presentation, but I do have a few comments to make about the report.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, so the Destination Development Grant is the last of the recovery infrastructure funding that's come to our community. I listed for you on the report a number of other opportunities that we've had to apply to funding through the recovery programs offered by the provincial and federal government. So there's a number of examples there of how we have leveraged external funding to align with projects outlined in our resort development strategy, in our new Parks and Rec master plan, and our upcoming transportation master plan. So this expression of interest submitted to the Ministry of Tourism by December 7th allows us to work with staff to narrow down a few different sites and opportunities to create some tourism infrastructure that will also appeal to to residents and recreators in our community. And we've been working together as a management team. There may be other comments from the CAO or Director Black about that, but we will be bringing forward an actual expression. Expressions of interest will be submitted to the ministry. Once they've scored them, they will invite us to submit an entire application, at which point we'll come back to council with a full fleshed out application that will require another resolution from council. So are there any questions about my report or any additional comments from other senior staff?
Any comments from council, Mr. Parliament?
Yeah, just to add to that. So I applaud Ingrid and Steve for bringing this forward to the management team. This is an aggressive approach to try to secure $1 million under the stream 1 of this grant program, which is called Activate. So ideally tourism infrastructure, visitor amenities, tourist attraction, ideally shovel-ready projects. And so management team has identified a couple of projects that we could be looking at, whether it's extending our multi-use path roadway network or a pump track facility to be located in the city. The challenge for us is 2 weeks tomorrow is the deadline to submit an EOI. So the expression of interest essentially is, do we qualify in the eyes of the grant folks to apply for funding? So what we're trying to do between now and December 7th is identify a project, have a site location identified with the project, because that is a requirement in the EOI, get it before them and hopefully qualify for a later specific detailed grant application for $1 million under this stream, at which time we'd be asking council for an endorsement. So staff are scrambling to get the EOI in, and I believe we will get a project under Stream 1 in for $1 million. It's an unconditional grant, so it's funded 100% by Destinations BC. We all know that we're an outdoor recreation facility. We're a welcoming community when it comes to outdoor recreation and tourism. And so that's the challenge right now. We have 2 weeks to get an EOI done. So we're bringing this forward to you for information as we chase this down. If you have any suggestions, we certainly want to hear it. We're going to be wrapping up this EOI within the next 12 to 14 days. So it's aggressive, but I think it can be done. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Any questions from council? Seeing none, I'm going to ask somebody to put the motion on the table for me, please. Councillor Cherry.
That expression of interest be submitted to the Destination Development Fund grant program for funding to support recreation and tourism amenities and related programming.
Seconder, Councillor Lucio. Any further discussion on this motion? I think this is a great way to get some money and a program into the community, so I'm definitely supportive of this. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? No motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Braun, Mr. Parliament, Mr. Black. Moving on to item 11B, Public Infrastructure Committee Terms of Reference. The terms of reference are in your package. Does someone want to put this motion on the table for us, please? Councilor Lucio.
That the Public Infrastructure Committee terms of reference dated November 22nd, 2022 be approved.
Seconder for that motion, please. Councilor Stapenhurst. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 11C, external auditor appointment. Someone want to make that motion for me, please? Councilor Orlando.
I move that BDO Canada LLP be appointed as the city's auditors for the 2022 year-end financial statement.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councilor Cherry. Any discussion on this motion? BDO has been our auditors for several years. Isn't that correct, Ms. Floyd? They do a great job and appreciate all the work that they do. So I'm definitely supportive of this. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Moving on to 11D, lease property agreement, Revelstoke Golf Club. Someone want to put that motion on the table? Ms. Donato, do you have a presentation?
Thank you, Your Worship. No, I do not have a presentation. However, I am available to answer any questions.
Okay, great. I'll ask for the motion to be put on the table and then ask for questions. So someone want to put item number 1 on the table for me, please. Councilor Devlin.
I move that the council give notice of their intention to dispose of an interest in land and associated buildings by way of a lease of property in the city of Revelstoke, legally described as lots 1 to 3, Villa Lot 24, Section 33, Plan 760, lots 1 to 3, Villa Lot 25, Section 33, Plan 760, Villa Lots 22, 23, and 26 to 28, Section 33, Plan 9551, Villa Lot 55, Section 4, Plan 9551, except part included in Plan 14252, Villa Lot 56, Section 4, Plan 9551, Lot 1, Section 4, Plan 8838, and Lot 2, Section 33, Plan NEP 61270, for the purpose of a golf course to the Revelstoke Golf Club. INC number S0004549 for a 5-year term commencing November 30th, 2022 and ending November 29th, 2027 with no option for renewal.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councilor Cherry. Any discussion on the motion or a question for Ms. Donato on this? So that's basically Ms. Donato taking the existing lands we now know as the Revelstoke Golf Club and releasing them for a 5-year term to the Revelstoke Golf Club, correct?
That is correct, Your Worship. The city owns the lands on which the golf course is operated. So the Golf Club Society operates the golf course on our behalf.
All right. Councilor Orlando.
Yes, just a general question through the chair, through Your Worship. The annual grant and aid to the golf club of $50,000, that's a separate part of the budget process. I guess my main question is, in terms of this particular lease, are there any changes, major changes on this one compared to the previous lease to the golf club?
Ms. Donato, any comment?
Through Your Worship, no, there are no changes. This is the same lease as the previous 5 years.
Follow-up, Council?
Your worship, yeah, just one, and again, it's a separate issue since we're looking at a lease here, but just any heads up on any capital requests or other financial considerations related to our responsibilities at the golf club, such as building maintenance, some sort of renovation project.
All right. Any comment on that, Mr. Neto?
Yes, your worship. So through the budgeting process for 2023, you will have some you will see some capital projects identified for the golf course. Two of the projects which will be coming forward for consideration are window replacement for the golf club house, which we started a portion of it this year, and we will complete the project next year, as well as some paving in the parking lot. That was one of the items identified through the building condition assessment reports that we had done on the facilities, I believe in 2020.
Right. Okay.
So you'll see those through the budget process.
All right.
Thank you.
Any other questions or concerns on the motion on the table? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Note this motion is carried. Item number 2, someone want to put that on the table for me, please? Councilor Devlin?
Sure. I move that the proposed lease for the Revelstoke Golf Club, INC number S0004549, be approved for execution upon fulfilling the legislative requirements for the disposition of property.
Seconder for that motion, please. Councilor Cherry. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item D3. Someone want to make that motion for me, please? Councilor Lucio.
That the chief administrative officer or designate and mayor be authorized to sign a lease agreement for a golf course managed by the Revelstoke Golf Club, INC number S0004549 for a 5-year term commencing November 30th, 2022, ending November 29th, 2027.
Seconder for that motion, please. Councilor Devlin. Any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? No, motion's carried. Thank you. All right, thank you, Mr. Neto. Appreciate that. Moving on to communications. So Revelstoke and Area Economic Development Commission meeting minutes, November 9th, 2022. Any comments on those minutes? I know you were there for part of it. Councilor Orlando, any comments?
Your worship, yeah, I just wanted to say it was really exciting to see the rollout of the Tech 3.0 strategy and updates on that. A little bit of history back in 2014 when I first ran for council, I was advocating for a technology role for the city and was the first chair of the what was called the High Tech Committee at the time. Has since been changed go on to do technology related things, including the facility that's now over where we were meeting. I think, for example, during the pandemic, there was a lot of support for businesses that came through some of the capabilities that were built in the years leading up to that. And it's just exciting to see what is outlined here in the future for new directions and adjusting direction as these projects go forward.
Yeah, great. Exciting times for this stuff. Ms. Braun, any comment? You're muted.
I have no questions, your worship, or comments, but if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
All right. Any questions on the minutes of the meeting? Seeing none, thank you. And thank you for your synopsis, Councillor. All right, Ms. Rousseau, do we have any questions from the press?
No questions, your worship.
All right, thank you. I would like to move in camera pursuant to section 90.1A, F, and K of the Community Charter. Someone want to make that motion for me, please? Councillor Orlando, seconded by Councillor Cherry. All in favor?